Greetings, Earthlings, and welcome to a journey to enlightenment, because a better life exists outside the perimeter of our perceptions. This is MB and Leadfoot Lee, and our purpose is to better your life by absorbing vast amounts of life-altering information from the experts in their fields and summarizing it for you in an entertaining and easy-to-understand format. All right, well, welcome to a journey to enlightenment, because a better life exists outside the perimeter of our perceptions. I am MB, and this is Leadfoot Lee. We are the hosts on this awesome journey. We are blessed today to have a guest, Chris Borgert, who's got some expertise in personality types, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I've done a lot of studies myself on the Myers-Briggs, and Chris isn't quite as familiar with that, but he certainly is delved into some other areas that he can share with us here in a little bit. But it sounds like he kind of first learned about this whole personality profile thing 30-ish years ago, and roughly the last 20 or so he's been utilizing it for sales, and he's been very successful in the sales industry and was selected to train people and such at his company, because if you understand how people's personality types and stuff work, it's much easier to determine how to approach them. In other words, certain types you can dive right in and give them all the details, and other ones you have to really gain their trust and that type of thing. So we'll let Chris get a little bit back into that in a bit here. But just before we get into that, though, with Chris, you know, everybody's got a very unique personality type. There's a lot of different methods and formats to try and distinguish each one. I tend to follow the Myers-Briggs only because when I was younger and I was really struggling to understand why I felt so different than most people, I started diving into this whole personality type thing, and I ran across this Myers-Briggs, who actually, it's just the name of a couple people, Catherine Cook Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers, who studied this stuff extensively. And it started off with a famous psychologist named Carl Jung, or Jung perhaps it is, I'm not even sure, who's a famous Swiss psychologist that died back in 1896. But through their work, they identified that there's essentially 16 different types of personalities, and they're broke down into 4 categories. And again, the reason I got into it so much was because I had found out that everything we do pretty much in this life is determined by, I shouldn't say everything, but a lot of what we do in this life is determined by our personalities. It affects where we go to church, you know, whether we're religious or spiritual, and we'll talk about religious versus spiritual on a future podcast. Political preferences, believe it or not, you know, a lot of people will sit and argue with each other over politics. Truth be told, that your personality type has an awful lot to do with which way you lean, whether it's Democratic, conservative, or otherwise. How you approach obstacles, how you treat others, how you celebrate successes, how you deal with failures, the clothes you wear, the car you drive, the friends you choose. It's absolutely amazing how many things are actually determined by that. And I'm not trying to say that if I know your personality type, for instance, that I can tell every single thing about you, because there's a lot to do with your background and your family and your friends and that type of thing. In fact, I was blessed enough to go on a date recently with a very awesome gal who happened to have the same personality type as somebody I was involved in a longer relationship with in the past. And it was really interesting to me to see the similarities and the differences, and I could absolutely pick up both. But it helped me to realize that it's certainly not everything. But the way the Myers-Briggs kind of breaks it down is it gives you 4 letters. And the first letter is either an E or an I, so extroversion versus introversion. And, you know, we pretty much all know what that is, obviously. The second letter is either an N or an S, and that's whether you're intuitive or you're a sensing type. And that really just means on whether you're externally focused or internally driven. So in other words, how you take things in through your five senses versus like your intuition on what's happening in your own mind type of thing versus somebody that's way more sense oriented. The third letter is F or T, so feeling or thinking, making decisions based more on logic or how you feel about things. And then the last letter is a J or a P, judging or perceiving, and that's how you take in information as far as making evaluations based on external data, or if you tend to prefer things that are, more through your perceptions, as far as being more, they tend to be more adaptable and creative than the sensing type. So, you'll get four letters, and in my case, it's an ENFP, where Leon's case, you are, do you remember? You are an INFJ. No, you're an INFP, actually. Yeah, that's right. We're only one letter apart. So anyway, we can get more into that here in a little while, but I'm interested in Chris's take on, and maybe Chris, you can give us a little background on the primary one that you like to use, because I know it's not the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs, and how that has affected, your job and your career and how you deal with people.
Well, thank you. And Lee and MB, I'm glad to join you today. I have had decades of experience with personality types, and it's been very interesting listening to you with the overview of the Myers-Briggs inventory, because I did not know some of those items, but it's interesting how they cross over very, very much to the personality profiles, if you will, that I've studied over the years. Was first written in the book Personality Plus. We had a person named Florence Littauer, who in 1978 wrote that book and started this whole thing. It was largely, most of these books at the time were written for self-help. As you can imagine, a lot of people were looking for opportunities to understand themselves. But those, it also was very, very helpful in helping people understand not only themselves, but also how they interact, or their personalities interact with the personalities of all those people around them, whether professionally or personally. So Florence Littauer also has, interestingly enough, 16 personality types. They are categorized over 4 major personality types, with an emphasis on a primary and a secondary personality. Now, it's the personality names that she gave to it were choleric, or dominant, outgoing type of personality. And it's also interesting that these personalities also break down into 2 that are more outgoing and 2 that are more quiet, if you will. So you have your choleric and your sanguine, who are both more outgoing. Choleric being, as I said, dominant, sanguine more the life of the party, if you will. We have then the more quiet or reserved personalities. One is the melancholy, and that would be your thinker, the person who's a little bit more interested in the details. And the other less dominant type is a phlegmatic.
Could you
and
repeat
that
that
personality
again? What
type
do
is
they call
usually the type of person that does not want to rock the boat. They're usually the peacemakers.
Very nice.
Interesting.
They call it phlegmatic, Phlegmatic, phlegmatic. And interesting name, interesting word. But anyway, that's how Florence Littauer brought this about. And her book, Personality Plus, has sold in the millions, and it has been used extensively, obviously, in the last 42 years. Sadly, she passed away at the age of 92 just last year. But her daughter picked up she was working with her daughter for many, many years, and also came up with a very quick, like 15-minute profile, if you will. It's called wired that way. And it's just 15 minutes, uses the same basics. So it's easy to look that up and to take that assessment to determine first your primary and your secondary personality types. And of course, each of these personality types you would use to interact with other people. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a different terminology, and that was created by Dr. Robert Rome in the late 90s. And he basically took the basic idea, but he took those names away from it and replaced it with the DISC method.
Yes,
which you may or may not have heard from, but it is used extensively in the business community for helping sales. Yep. So again, DISC, again, dominant, and so that would be D-I as the sanguine, S as phlegmatic, and the C as melancholy. So these are the types, again, they don't really change the meaning of what Florence Littauer started off with. It just took away those particular names. And again, advancing the theory of a primary and secondary personality. Now, the thing that's nice about understanding these, you know, first of all, you want to understand yourself. Just like Myers-Briggs, it gives you a great understanding of, you know, again, your personality types, where it falls in that 16 categories, and then to give you, you know, an understanding of yourself. Where DISC and Florence Littauer took off from that is to show you how you, not only through understanding your own personality, can identify the personalities in those people that you meet every single day.
Well, I was just going to ask, now, you know, I know we're getting pretty much into the technical aspects of this, but I kind of want to, I'm a little anxious to get into the meat and potatoes as far as what are you finding as far as the, you know, the benefits of utilizing like the DISC thing and that type of thing for, you know, your training with these employees and for your own personal gain and that type of thing?
Absolutely. So first of all, understanding your own personality is just, it's a nice thing to know. But more importantly, and as I have learned over the years and in training a number of people, is showing them how they can identify those personality types in other people, and it almost becomes reflexive. At this point, I could talk to you for about 30 seconds and determine what your primary personality type is. And in doing so, I can determine how best to approach a conversation if, as a salesperson, I want to engage you in a sales discussion. And I absolutely do not want to step on your toes. So I do know that my personality type is more of a technical side. I like to talk about the details. I like to talk about numbers, but I know that two types of personalities,
I am the high
I and the high S, do not like to talk about those. And as a matter, exactly. So as a high I, you don't like to get into the tall grass, and I would pick that up immediately and determine that you were not the type of person that I want to go and bore to death, basically. And again, I have a part of my personality, secondary, if you will, that is high D. And I have been developing that over the years, but I have to be very cautious about talking business with another high D. They have a tendency to butt heads. So you don't want to turn somebody off with regards to, you know, just their personality types. You're also going to have to determine how, in working with a high I or a high S type personality, that you may have to step in and help them, especially if they are not, well, neither one of those folks are wanting to be a champion, a change champion in organizations, generally speaking, because they, well, the high S, again, does not want to rock the boat. They are not a natural leader. The high I, again, these are the folks who love to have fun, but when it comes to taking a process or a problem up the ladder in the chain of command, it's not necessarily in their DNA. So it's one of those things that I have learned to offer to come alongside them and to guide and help them through the process. I don't need to necessarily do that for a high D. That's a dominant personality in and of himself. So I generally don't. I just act as a support system for that person. And the same thing goes for, more so, but not necessarily always, for a high C personality who is going to be...
And real quick, just so if you could identify the D, like you said, is the dominant.
Yes.
I can't remember off the top of my head what I stands for again.
I just think of them as the life of the party. This is a person that does not, they're the ones who love to go to the party, be the life of the party, but hate to plan the party, if you know what I'm saying.
Right. I know exactly what you're saying. Like I said, I'm a high I. So then S is, what does the S stand for?
Again, that is the phlegmatic. So that is the person who is not, they don't want to rock the boat. They're usually very, or more so, introverted than most. And they make excellent managers. They make excellent workers, but I think they make a better worker than they do a manager necessarily. But they don't like personal
confrontation
or prefer a professional confrontation. Absolutely, they shy away from that in every regard. So it's difficult for them. That's not to say that they can't be good at managing people, but they tend to be more of a support person than anything else.
And I do remember the C stands for conscientious, so I know those are the type that tend to be real detail oriented.
Yeah, conscientious or cognitive, as they, they're the folks that we look to as the thinkers, rather than the doers necessarily, and it can be, as any case of these personality types, there are, as you know, positive aspects and negative aspects for each one of these types. Again, a dominant personality can be very abrasive. Somebody who is a high I can come across as being a little bit aloof. They want to have the fun, but they sometimes don't have their head in a particular meeting. Yes, not necessarily always, but sometimes. Again, the high S is going to be somebody who doesn't seem like they're high energy. And the high C is going to get bogged down in the details. And a lot of times, if you approach somebody like that, they will become a bit stagnant, or what would you say, a bit paralyzed by getting too much information. And they're the ones that are, I think, one of the harder personality types to work with, from my perspective, only because you can get so much into the detail that you forget about what you're doing.
Right.
So,
right.
And
so far as friendships and that type of thing goes, do you find yourself kind of analyzing your connections and friends and that type of thing, and to take it a step further, even wonder, have you found a pattern that you tend to magnetize towards certain types versus others?
As I said, it is reflexive for me. So yes, every person that I meet nowadays, I don't have any problem in identifying their personality type. But I will say that no, I do not have a particular personality type that I find more enjoyable to hang around with than others. Now, if I were to say, occasionally I find it enjoyable to be around another high C, like myself. We can talk details if we want to. We don't bore each other over it. But I do understand that there's a lot of other personalities that don't enjoy that. And I do enjoy being around a high S and high S. Of course, these are folks that are, these are the peacemakers. I enjoy working with them. I enjoy spending time with them. They are low energy, and that's fine. It doesn't hurt to be that way. Of course, everybody likes to be around a high I, right, Mark?
Yes.
It's nice to be
If it's a social gathering of sorts, not
exactly right.
necessarily at work. Not necessarily at work.
Right, exactly. The setting is key, definitely.
Yes.
But if you want to have fun at a party, you want to invite a bunch of high I's, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Correct.
So these are.
Are you familiar with Jordan Peterson at all?
I am not. No.
Okay. He's a Canadian psychologist that's got at least a 155, 160 IQ,
Wow.
and he is a teacher at the college, so he would be a professor, and he talks a lot about personality types, and his big thing is as far as openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and extroversion. So that's the four things that he kind of delves into. Are you kind of familiar with that particular?
I'm familiar with the philosophy, yes.
Okay.
I was wondering if we could just take a 10-second break here so I can go and get my charger, because I was just seeing my phone is at 10%. Can we do that?
Yeah, no, you absolutely. Yeah, you go ahead and do what you're going to do
I'll be
here,
right
and
back.
I'll fill in a little bit here. So, just kind of coming off of what Chris is talking about here, is that the reason we're getting to this personality types. I know that this is a podcast primarily about enlightenment, but I want people to understand that enlightenment really has to do with learning in all different areas. What makes people tick, what's going on with our world, and spirituality, and it really involves taking on a lot of different areas and becoming somewhat more educated about them, because it's I found through my own personal experience, and we're going to probably talk this next podcast unless something more pressing comes up, about what it really means to become enlightened, because there's definitely different definitions and that type of thing with that. But back to this personality thing here again real quick. If they would teach us stuff, and I think Chris would probably agree with me on this, if they would teach this stuff like in high school, college type thing, I firmly believe the divorce rate would be far less than it is today, because people would understand that certain personality types mesh very well together, as Chris was kind of talking about, and certain ones can tend to repel. And you can have friends that are very different because you're not exposed to them like constantly. Where if you're gonna have get married and you have a spouse or whatever the case, or a live-in partner, it's a whole different game. If you've got somebody that thinks on a very different track than you do, like Chris is indicating, if you're real conscientious, and you're with somebody like myself that's very I type, where I'm really life of the party on a regular basis, and I don't want to delve into the details, that can be real conflicting.
Yes.
And so it's when you hear people talk about finding their soulmate, for instance, generally it means they found the perfect mesh as far as on a personality type.
I would.
And
I would
go ahead,
tend to disagree with you a little bit, although I agree that it would be wonderful if people were introduced to this basic concept. College, I believe, would definitely be the age or maturity level that people would take this in a little bit better. High school, definitely not.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that for sure.
But bottom line, people can, as they say, they tend to gravitate as far for spouse or partners to, as they say, somebody who's an opposite, as they say. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that case. As a high C, and I started off. So I married a high I, but her secondary personality is a high C. So, and that is very unusual. That is, if you were looking at the quadrants, usually the primary and the secondary are going to be along the horizontal and vertical lines. They will not be opposite corners. and my wife is one of those opposite corners kind of people. So
Interesting.
it is interesting how she is the life of the party, but she likes to be organized. So,
Huh. Yeah, you definitely don't find that every day.
no, that is probably the least common personality type, primary and secondary, that you can find. And she is unique in so many ways, and I love her. And we've celebrated our 30th year of marriage this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you. But I'll also say that, personality types do not have to remain stagnant. To your point, I think that in seeking enlightenment, we have to continue to educate ourselves, never to stop reading, never to stop learning something new. And I find that with the personality types, as you understand what the strengths and the weaknesses of each of those personality types are, and for yourself personally, you want to seek to build on the strength that you have. And as all self-help books are usually trying to do, is to help you improve in those areas that you're weak or challenged in. And that's something that each one of us, as a high C, I want to be more outgoing. I want to be more and in the business world, I have to develop more of a high D, and that's something too. And on the other end of that spectrum, I appreciate the peacemakers, those people that are trying to keep things calm, and that's also personal. Yeah. So that's the thing, is that as you're going through life, your personality will change, and it does, except for those people who are exceptionally hard-headed. But if you do have a more, observant side, you will see that there's value in so many of the personality types around us. And ideally, and Dr. Robert Rome and Florence Littauer both point out that if we're striving towards improving ourselves, we are also striving towards balancing our personalities so that we are, in effect, a very rounded type personality. Where if you were to take, I would imagine, the Myers-Briggs or the DISC inventories at the very beginning of our lives, you'll see that we'll have a very polar type outcome. We'll be very, very strong in one area and very weak in another. And as we go through life, we'll take a little bit of those edges off, if you will, to help.
That's a great point. I tend to believe that your personality type doesn't necessarily change throughout your life, but it does become more well-rounded, and areas that you are weak in tend to be strengthened, and areas that you're like overly strong in, you tend to mellow on a little bit, and you accept people that aren't necessarily super strong in those particular areas because you mature and that type of thing. So exactly. I absolutely agree with that. And one thing I wanted to mention too is that a book that changed my life actually was called an ENFP, which is my personality type, an ENFP's survival guide. There's a psychologist by the name of Heidi Priebe, young gal, very, very smart, that made it her mission to go out and disprove the Myers-Briggs. Mm. And in the process became an absolute avid advocate for it, because she had figured out that it is 100% accurate for everything that she was basically studying about people type thing. So it was really, really an interesting book. And I think that if people figure out, like you said, Chris, if people figure out their personality types, and you can do that by going on, there's different websites, like for the Myers-Briggs, there's 16personalities.com, and there's a number of different ones. And I know you can just go in and dial in DISC test and that type of thing, the DISC. Right. But through doing that, like you said, you learn about yourself, and it's almost like you feel like people are following you around with a damn camera and a microphone or something, because you can't believe how accurately they can tell you about yourself. It's absolutely crazy the first time you run through that process.
Correct.
And that's why it's so important that people learn to understand that we're all different, and thank God, because whether you believe in evolution or creation or whatever the scenario, you have to admit that it's awful awesome that everybody does have these different types, because otherwise we'd all want to do the same types of jobs.
Or we wouldn't,
not everybody.
or we wouldn't be able to tolerate each other.
Right. It's a very good point. Yeah, he's absolutely right. You stick 20 eyes in a room, they're going to be bored with each other because they're all going to be, shooting for the attention. And you stick all the C's in one room, and they're all going to be boring each other with details after a while because they'll be arguing over them or whatever the case.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So it's like, thank God.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's really interesting.
Well, that's the one thing that that does keep things interesting in life, and it doesn't. I find that there's a lot of people like yourself and Lee that, obviously you're expanding your horizons, and it's exciting to see that. And for those people who are willing to do that, the high S and high C, not necessarily, but the D type, again, if they don't get in their own way, they tend to want to expand their horizons, whether it be for business or for pleasure, who knows. And a high I, if they can tone things down a little bit, they find that, they are not the center of the party. They're not the center of attention, but their role in life is to make things a lot more interesting for everybody else. So I appreciate you.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point too, that certain types tend to be more creative because they are more open-minded in that type of thing, where other people, analyze the hell out of things and they figure out the facts. And here again, if you didn't have both types, you would certainly have your share of issues, because it would be so weighted one way or the other.
That's right. I know that there's a lot of other personality studies. There was one that I read about that happened in 2018, where some scientists who, again, did not want to believe in personality types. And so they went ahead and studied, get this, 1.5 million people were in this data set. And they broke it down differently than DISC or Myers-Briggs, for that matter. They came out with, of all categories, average, outgoing, creative. I forget the exact word that they used, but it was, if you will, self-centered and role model. So there we have 5 different types. And they said that a majority of people fell into the average category. People who are outgoing might be high D or high I. People who are creative could be high C, could be, well, there's a number of verses, but again, the DISC type personality could have some creative aspects to it. Somebody who is self-centered, of course, that could be a negative aspect of a high D or a high I. And a role model, interesting category, but I think that a number of people that might be considered a role model might be people who are teachers or business leaders. That's it kind of comes into it. And what these scientists discovered is that, again, the personality types changed over a person's lifetime. You can imagine that a younger person would tend to be more self-centered, right? And we would all tend towards being better role models as we age and gather experiences. So it's interesting to see how many different ways people look at personality types.
Yes, it really is. And I think it's important that people realize that there's not, a right or a wrong or a better or a worse type of thing. But the primary reason that I really that Lee and I wanted to do this, this podcast on this, is because it's important that people understand that we're all very different. You know, I mean, our minds track differently, so it's not necessarily all about our past experiences and that type of thing, and past relationships, but it also has a bunch to do with this.
Mhm.
So when when you find somebody else on the opposite end of the political spectrum, or religious, or whatever the case, try to understand that people are often driven to believe the way they believe based a lot on their personality types.
Mhm.
And if you understand that, you're not going to get so conflicting. You're going to look at it more like from a sense of amazement, like, wow, I'm surprised you think that way, but now I understand why you do, because obviously, your brain tracks differently than I do. Because, especially when you're young, you always tend to think everybody does and should think like you, and if they don't, you get mad as hell. And it's like,
Right.
so it's,
Well, that's my takeaway. You know,
yeah,
that that well, my personality type wouldn't be good because where would I fall into? Like
so you're an introverted, you're intuitive, you're feeling, and then you're perceiving.
Mhm.
you brought up that what time in your life should you be presented this?
Mhm.
So it wouldn't be good in high school, but college, you've got a few years under your belt, so you might pick it up. But definitely in your 40s and your 50s, if you would know that you would not be a good manager because you don't like conflict, and it's just the way your personality type is,
Mhm.
that this is the reason why you struggle with it. There's a real benefit to it.
You make a very good point. That's that whole
Then
self-awareness.
yeah,
That's the
just
biggest thing. It's like, once you understand that, it's like, oh, that's why I struggle with this, or I struggle with that, and so doesn't.
right.
It's just that eye-opening experience of, oh my God, no wonder.
Mhm. Well, self-awareness is such a key. But I know that
Yes.
so many times, you come into a situation, either personal or professional, and you find that you just don't have what it takes, if you will. I know that some people go into sales thinking that it's going to be, big paychecks and that sort of thing. They find out that it's not that easy. They're going to run into a lot of people that they find disagreeable, and it's just part of that game, if you will. Um, and like you were saying, as you're getting older, I would say that 40 might be late in identifying your more sensitive or cognitive side, and everybody does have that side to one degree or another. A self-awareness is something that obviously comes with age, but I would think that the basics of this personality understanding and being able to apply it in your own lives for your benefit and for the benefit of others really should come in your early 20s, definitely towards your mid 20s. And it's nice to be able to, you see a lot of, I know in my own kids, I see a lot of maturing going on during those times, especially before they're 25, and they start to pick that up. But I see that in my own kids too, some of the negative personalities, and I think that every one of us like to help out if we can, but you got to be careful where you bring that. Obviously, in a business setting, it's more expected, I guess, to be asked to explore your range of abilities and to develop those abilities. It's not always welcome in our personal lives, especially interpersonal relationships with friends and family. So you got to be very cautious about that, where you can take this.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting. I agree with you to watch your own children and kind of figure out their personality types. And, it really helps you to understand them. And then, of course, if you bring them into the light and they understand themselves and they understand, mom or dad are quite different than you, and this is why, it really, it's just a really interesting conversation, number one, to have with your children. But number two, it helps them to start seeing the world. And I've gotten pretty good at identifying people on the Myers-Briggs, not nearly as good as you, as far as I can't do it in 30 seconds. But if I have an hour conversation with somebody, almost guaranteed I've got their Myers-Briggs type nailed down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pretty awesome spot to get to when you can do that, because as we both talked about, that you just have a much better understanding of who you're dealing with, and you realize there's certain areas that you got to be kind of sensitive with, and there's certain people that you can dive right into the heart of things without offending them in any way, and it's just it's really, really beneficial.
It's true. Absolutely. So
Anyway, I think go ahead. You got a little bit you want to add?
no, I don't have much more to add. I would just say that I would encourage people to pursue a better understanding of their own personality. I think that it will help them not only understand themselves, but also to become more aware of the people around them, what makes them tick, and if at the very least, to help them get along better with their coworkers, family members, and friends. So, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think everybody should try to expand their horizons. Again, learning is something we should never stop doing. If you stop learning, you're just going to stop growing. And it's just, it's one thing that I think that every one of us should pursue. And, for whatever reason you choose to learn more about yourself and others, I think it's all good.
You coming on, taking the time, and helping broaden my horizons, because this has been something, personality types has been something I've been very, very interested in for at least the last 10 to 15 years. And I love getting people's perspectives. So really, really appreciate you coming on.
So like I said, my takeaway is this is very informative with personality types. People might not struggle as much as they do in their lives if they just realize that you probably are more comfortable being in the positions that you normally gravitate to anyways, because it makes you feel comfortable. Instead of chasing a carrot, that's just going to be a struggle, right?
I would agree.
So that's my thoughts about it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You have a great rest of your night.
And you. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.